Right now, Congress is racing against a shutdown deadline, and the choices being made could directly affect paychecks, public services, and how the federal government operates for months to come. Some parts of this funding bill are meant to keep things stable, but other parts quietly shift priorities in ways that could matter to you more than you realize. One delay, one missed update, and suddenly services slow down or rules change with very little warning. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever been personally affected by a government shutdown, even in a small way, like delayed services, stress, or uncertainty? Share your experience in the comments. And while you're thinking about that, let's break down what's actually happening right now. So first, here's the situation. Congress was staring down a January 30th deadline. If lawmakers failed to act, large parts of the federal government would shut down again. And this isn't ancient history. The last shutdown only ended a couple of months ago, back in November, and it became the longest shutdown in US history. Federal workers were furloughed. Many went weeks without pay. Services slowed or stopped altogether. And a lot of Americans lost confidence that Washington could even handle the basics of governing. Because of that, there was intense pressure this time to avoid another shutdown. What Congress put together is a massive funding package worth about $1.2 trillion. Yes, trillion with a T. It's not a single bill either. It's what lawmakers call a minibus, meaning 4 major funding bills bundled into one package. Together, these bills fund large parts of the government through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. And that matters because this isn't just a short-term patch or a temporary extension. It's designed to last for the rest of the year. The agencies covered here are some of the biggest and most important in the federal government. We're talking about defense, homeland security, labor, health and human services, education, transportation, and housing and urban development. These departments alone make up more than 70% of the discretionary budget Congress controls each year. So if you're wondering why this deal is such a big deal, that's why. It's basically the backbone of how the government runs day to day. What's interesting is how both political parties are talking about this deal. Democrats and Republicans are both framing it as an attempt to restore stability. After months of shutdown threats and political brinkmanship, just keeping the government functioning has become a goal in itself. One Democratic senator even said that using shutdowns as leverage doesn't really work because agencies still operate in limited ways and the real damage mostly hits workers and the public. From that perspective, passing a full funding bill gives Congress more control and oversight than letting everything grind to a halt. But, and this is a big but, agreeing on the overall package doesn't mean lawmakers agree on everything inside it. The most controversial part by far is funding for the Department of Homeland Security, especially Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. And this is where the bill really shows how divided Washington still is. Earlier this month, an ICE officer fatally shot a woman in Minneapolis. That incident reignited calls from progressive lawmakers for stricter oversight and deeper reforms at ICE. Some lawmakers said they would not support any bill that didn't seriously rein in the agency. Words like surrender were used, and many said reforms were absolutely necessary. So going into these negotiations, DHS funding was a political minefield. The compromise Congress reached is a mix of restraint and concession. ICE funding stays roughly flat at about $10 billion for the rest of the fiscal year. That alone is notable because in Washington, flat funding can feel like a cut when costs keep rising. On top of that, funding for enforcement and removal operations is reduced by $115 million. Detention capacity is also cut by about 5,500 beds. Then there are new oversight measures. The bill sets aside $20 million for body cameras for immigration enforcement agents, another $20 million for independent oversight of detention facilities, and new training requirements focused on de-escalation and public interaction. It also tightens DHS's ability to move money around internally if transparency and reporting rules aren't followed. In some cases, their authority to shift funds between accounts can be suspended. Even with all of that, many Democrats are still unhappy, and they've been very open about it. The bill doesn't include broader reforms, like explicitly banning the detention or deportation of US citizens. For many progressives, that's a red line, but party leaders argue that letting DHS funding lapse wouldn't actually stop immigration enforcement. ICE already received large sums in last year's tax and spending package, and during shutdowns, many enforcement activities continue anyway. From their point of view, this bill at least puts some guardrails in place. Republicans see things very differently. They argue DHS funding is essential for border security, disaster response, airport security, and maritime safety. A shutdown, they say, would disrupt FEMA disaster responses, TSA screening at airports, and Coast Guard operations. From that angle, even imperfect funding is better than chaos. Immigration isn't the only area where this bill shifts priorities. Defense spending jumps to more than $839 billion. That reflects bipartisan concern about global instability and military readiness. Whether people agree with that level of spending or not, it's clear defense remains one of the strongest consensus areas in Congress. On the domestic side, housing and urban development is one of the biggest winners, getting about $84.3 billion, roughly a 9% increase. Education gets a smaller bump of about $217 million, bringing its budget to around $79 billion. Health and Human Services rises to nearly $117 billion, and Labour gets about $13.7 billion. Transportation, however, actually takes a small hit, with funding reduced by $111 million. That's a good example of how late-stage negotiations work. When everything has to fit under a spending cap, gains in one area often mean cuts somewhere else. It's a zero-sum game, and not everyone walks away happy. Layered into this funding package is a separate healthcare deal, and it's easy to miss if you're not paying close attention. This agreement revives several health policies that were dropped late last year after criticism from President Donald Trump and Elon Musk. One major piece targets pharmacy benefit managers, the middlemen in the drug pricing system. Lawmakers from both parties accuse them of driving up costs while operating with little transparency. The deal also extends telehealth flexibilities through 2027, which is huge for rural patients, seniors, and anyone who struggles to access in-person care. Hospital-at-home programs get funding through 2030, allowing certain treatments to happen safely at home instead of in a hospital. Community health centres also get a big boost, with funding set to reach $4.6 billion by fiscal year 2026. Another interesting provision allows Medicare to cover multi-cancer early detection tests. That reflects growing interest in preventive care and catching diseases earlier, when treatment is often more effective and less costly. But again, not everything made it in. Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies that expired at the end of last year are not restored. That means higher premiums for millions of people, and many are already feeling that impact. Also missing are key parts of President Trump's recently announced healthcare plan, like expanded health savings accounts and more aggressive drug pricing rules. Fiscal conservatives are raising concerns about the overall cost, putting some of these health provisions at risk as the bill moves forward. Politically, this bill is walking a tightrope. In the House, Republicans hold a very narrow majority, meaning they need almost all of their members on board unless they rely on Democratic votes. In the Senate, it's even tougher. 60 votes are required, so bipartisan support isn't optional, it's mandatory. That keeps debates over ICE funding and healthcare very much alive. Historically, shutdown deadlines usually lead to temporary fixes, short-term extensions that just kick the can down the road. This deal is different because it tries to settle funding for the rest of the year. Whether it actually works depends on whether lawmakers can convince their own parties and the public that compromise is better than constant crisis. One senator described it as less of a peace treaty and more like a ceasefire. The immediate crisis is paused, but the deeper conflicts are still there. So what does all of this mean for you? In the short term, it lowers the risk of another shutdown. That means federal workers keep getting paid, services keep running, and there's less uncertainty hanging over the economy. In the long term, it shows that Congress can still pass large, complex legislation, but only under intense pressure and with a lot of unresolved tension left behind. And maybe that's the real takeaway. This funding bill isn't perfect. It doesn't solve the deepest disagreements over immigration, healthcare, or the size of government. But it does show what compromise looks like right now. It's messy. It leaves people on both sides unhappy. And it still matters because the alternative is instability that affects real people in real ways. So keep an eye on how this moves forward, because even when a shutdown is avoided, the choices made in these bills shape far more than just the headlines.